Welcome back to America's Fractured Politics. The story of American democracy has always been told as a march toward justice, a complicated, often painful one, but a march nonetheless. From the Reconstruction Amendments to the Civil Rights Act, the idea has been that every citizen deserves a voice, a ballot, and a say in how this country is run. That idea, fragile but iconic, has always been the moral heartbeat of the Republic. Yet in 2025, that march toward justice feels like it's slowing down, and maybe even spinning backward. Because right now, across dozens of states, the freedom to vote, the very foundation of democracy, is under attack in ways unseen in decades. Republicans like to frame these changes as election integrity measures, saying they're preventing voter fraud. But they're not guarding democracy. They're manipulating it, systemically, strategically, and shamelessly. When you look closely at these new state laws, you see their purpose. Disenfranchised groups most likely to vote Democratic, people of color, low-income Americans, college students, the elderly, the young, the communities that gave Joe Biden and Democrats victories in 2020 and 2022 are now being chipped away through gerrymandering, restrictive voting procedures, and a growing infrastructure of suppression. Let's look at what's happening across several battleground states, Georgia, Texas, Florida, and some Midwestern states like Wisconsin and Ohio. Republican-controlled legislatures have introduced tighter voter ID requirements. On paper, that sounds harmless. Who wouldn't want to verify voters? But the devil lives in the details. In many of these states, acceptable IDs are limited to driver's license or passports, documents that millions of Americans don't have. Student IDs, often rejected. Municipal or tribal IDs, disqualified. A retiree in a nursing home who doesn't drive anymore may find themselves suddenly unable to cast a ballot after decades of voting. A college freshman who moved across state lines for school might have to jump through bureaucratic hoops to prove their right to vote in the very community where they live and study. And this isn't random, it's deliberate. Republicans have mastered the art of small, technical changes that look neutral on paper, but tilt the playing field dramatically in practice. Restrict early voting, limit mail-in ballots, close urban polling places while expanding suburban ones. Shorten registration windows, purge voter rolls under the pretense of cleaning them. Each change by itself may seem like a minor inconvenience. Taken together, they form a web of obstacles designed to catch certain voters and freeze them out. Behind this strategy lies a simple, cynical truth. If Republicans allowed every eligible American to vote easily and freely, they would lose many of their strongholds. They know they can't win by persuading the majority, so they win by shrinking the electorate. In some states, that strategy is nearing perfection. By tailoring laws to minimize turnout among voters of color and the working poor, they've created a shadow democracy where power no longer flows from the people, but from manipulation. Federal efforts to protect voting rights have been undercut repeatedly. The John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, designed to restore federal oversight in jurisdictions with a history of discrimination, remains stalled in Congress. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, once hailed as the crown jewel of civil rights, has been gutted by Supreme Court decisions over the past decade. Shelby County v. Holder in 2013 removed the pre-clearance provision that required states to get federal approval for voting changes. The result was catastrophic. Within hours of that ruling, states rushed to enact restrictive measures that had been sitting in waiting rooms, pre-written and ready to deploy. Today, we're living with the fallout of that decision, and it's accelerating. Donald Trump and his allies are pushing for proof of citizenship requirements to register to vote under the pretense of stopping non-citizen voting, a problem so rare it's statistically non-existent. But this serves another purpose. Most Americans don't have a passport. Many don't have a birth certificate readily accessible. The intent is clear: create confusion, create barriers, and make voting feel risky or unattainable for thousands of legitimate citizens who have every right to cast a ballot. In some states, this assault extends beyond paperwork. They're now populating polling places with partisan operatives, election observers, as they call them, In theory, observers are supposed to ensure transparency. In practice, they can easily cross the line into intimidation. Imagine walking into a polling station where armed or aggressive partisans hover over you, questioning your right to vote, challenging your registration on the spot. It evokes memories of pre-civil rights era suppression tactics where intimidation kept whole communities from the polls without a single law needing to be passed. And yet these efforts are coordinated, funded by national Republican groups, guided by right-wing think tanks, and reinforced by conservative media echo chambers. They form a national mosaic of anti-democratic strategy. Voter suppression isn't an isolated problem. It's institutional. It's baked into a party apparatus that increasingly views mass participation as a threat, not a virtue. If this pattern continues, we risk turning American elections into theater, rituals without substance. The ballot will still exist, yes. The voting machine will still hum on Election Day, but the results will already be rigged by design. Democracy becomes performative, a pageant of legitimacy masking the erosion of popular power. So what can be done? First and foremost, fight it in the courts. Lawyers like Mark Elias have led aggressive litigation across multiple states, challenging gerrymandered maps, unlawful purges, and discriminatory voter ID laws. Some victories have been won, though often temporary, as conservative courts seek procedural excuses to maintain restrictive systems. But litigation remains the first line of defense. Every unconstitutional law must be dragged into the light of a courtroom. Every suppression tactic met with the blunt force of the Constitution's equal protection guarantees. This is not just a political fight. It's a legal one for the soul of democracy. Second, match their organization with our own. If Republicans want to fill polling places with partisan observers, Democrats must flood them with trained, dedicated poll watchers of their own, citizens who can ensure that every voter is treated fairly. The simple presence of balanced oversight can neutralize intimidation. Election integrity demands eyes on all sides, not just one. Third, and maybe the most important step, Americans must show up to vote in historic numbers. Turnout itself is the weapon against suppression. Every additional voter makes each barrier less effective. When tens of millions turn out despite the hurdles, they overwhelm the system designed to silence them. It's why 2020 terrified the Republican elite. Mail-in ballots, youth turnout, and record minority participation nearly washed away their decades-long grip on red state dominance. The lesson is clear. When democracy organizes, suppression collapses under the weight of civic will. Fourth, voter education. Every law change, every confusing new rule, every newly relocated polling station must be countered with mass information campaigns. Confusion suppresses votes as effectively as intimidation does. Grassroots organizations, local newsrooms, churches, civic groups, they must become the nerve centers of democracy education. People need to know how to vote, when they can vote, and what IDs are accepted. Knowledge in this contact is armor. Fifth, voter registration efforts must return to the streets. In-person drives, coalitions with labor unions, colleges, and faith-based groups are critical. Registration laws vary widely. Some states allow same-day registration, others make it a laborious multi-week process. Where obstacles exist, allies must step in. Grassroots groups like Stacey Abrams' Fair Fight demonstrated that outreach to underrepresented groups can shift electoral outcomes dramatically. Recreating that effort nationally is both an ethical and strategic necessity. Sixth, use state-level ballot initiatives to expand access. In states where legislatures are hostile, direct democracy through ballot propositions can circumvent partisan corruption. Initiatives in Michigan, Colorado, and Nevada have expanded mail-in voting. Automatic registration and independent redistricting commissions, all through citizen petitions and popular vote. When legislatures fail democracy, the people themselves must become its legislative force. Tell the human stories behind these laws. Policy debates alone don't move hearts, but stories of disenfranchised voters, grandmothers turned away, students designed, lifelong citizens forced to sit out elections because of paperwork technicalities, illustrate the real human cost of voter suppression. When the public sees these stories, when journalists and activists bring them forward, the issue stops being abstract and becomes moral. Fight disinformation with speed and strategy. Republican operatives have weaponized misinformation about elections, fake texts about polling hours, lies about voter fraud, social media campaigns sowing distrust in mail ballots. Countering that requires rapid response systems, using trusted local messengers, churches, radio stations, and community organizations who can refute lies before they metastasize. Truth cannot be slow in an age of viral falsehoods. Use independent media, podcasts, streaming, community radio to spotlight voter suppression itself. This campaign to silence the electorate will fail if light falls on it. If enough voices refuse to normalize what's happening. The very conversation we're having right now is part of that effort to remind listeners that voting rights aren't a partisan luxury. They're the fundamental expression of freedom. Here's the uncomfortable truth. This isn't just politics as usual anymore. It's a struggle over whether America remains a democracy at all. Because when one party tries to pick its voters instead of voters choosing their leaders, the social contract breaks. When the right vote becomes conditional, based on how you're likely to vote, representation dies. Every authoritarian system begins with a systemic destruction of participation. When the ballot stops being universal, citizenship becomes selective, and that's the road we're heading down. You can hear the echoes of earlier eras in this Jim Crow literacy tests. Poll taxes, illegal purchase camouflaged as maintenance, the techniques update, but the intention doesn't. It's regression masquerading as reform. Those in power always say the same thing, that these are minor changes, administrative improvements, efforts to protect the process. But democracy doesn't need protection from voters. It needs protection for voters, from those who fear them. We should be clear about what's happening. This is an organized nationwide project to make minority rule permanent. Through gerrymandered maps, voter purges, and judicial manipulation, Republicans have built a mechanism that converts minority votes into majority control. They don't have to persuade the public because they've re-engineered the system. Machinery of representation itself. So it falls on the rest of us to fight harder, to litigate, to organize, to educate, to vote, and to tell the truth relentlessly. We can't save democracy through apathy or wishful thinking. It requires labor, unity, and outrage, harnessed into action. The fortunate irony is that Americans have done this before. Every expansion of the franchise in our history, from women's suffrage to the Voting Rights Act, was met with fierce opposition. Yet each wave of democratic regression has been confronted and beaten back by people refusing to surrender the principle that every voice matters. This generation faces its own test. The tools have changed. The disinformation campaigns, the legislative maneuvers, the Supreme Court's complicity. But the moral choice is the same. Participate or lose your rights to those who will happily erase them. In the coming election cycles, turnout must become the movement. Education must become activism. Litigation must never stop. If we treat democracy as a given, it will disappear quiet. If we defend it like the right it is, we still have a chance to reclaim our stolen government. So wherever you live, Georgia, Wisconsin, Arizona, Texas, start local. Volunteer. Register voters. Challenge misinformation at your dinner table, your workplace, your campus. Keep pressure on Congress to revisit the John Lewis Act and to restore the Voting Rights Act's full power. Freedom doesn't replenish itself automatically. It's sustained by citizens unwilling to be passengers in their own democracy. If we do this, if we organize, stay vigilant, and confront these attacks with the same energy once used to create the right to vote, then we can turn this tide. The goal isn't just to win elections, it's to make sure every election remains real, legitimate, and worthy of the name, democracy. Because the ballot isn't just a piece of paper, it's an act of faith that your country still belongs to you. And that's worth defending, every time, everywhere, by everyone. This has been America's Fractured Politics. Thank you for tuning in. And remember, act.